Starting, so there we go.
There it goes. All right, hello there, and welcome once again to second episode. We're not going to number everyone, but this is still only the second, so why not, right? The second ever episode of the movie discussion Pocket Dimension, which of course is just a little pocket dimension where time does not exist, and the only thing that matters is film. Jay and I are the only denizens of this pocket dimension, but you guys at least have a window into it. And you'll get to see us do what Siskel and Ebert wish they could have done, but weren't cool enough to pull off.
And before we get too deep here, there will be spoilers, heavy spoilers.
Yeah, that's usually going to be our mandate for these episodes that we're going to do, is because, as we said before, try to get pretty in-depth into the films we do. So, yes, there's going to be spoilers. So, for this particular one is the second directorial effort by somewhat acclaimed, famed director Gus Van Sant, the 1989 film Drugstore Cowboy, which was based on the autobiographical novel of the same name by James Fogle, and it's basically about his life, a big portion of his life as a fairly heavy drug user and low-level criminal. And the film stars Matt Dillon in the title role. You've also got Kelly Lynch in there, a young Heather Graham, and of all people, for some reason, Beat Generation writer William S. Burroughs, who I guess is fair to say probably knew a thing or two about drugs.
Oh, yeah.
So, maybe not such, maybe actually a very clever casting role there.
So, yeah, I don't know how they pulled that off, but I guess just good timing. Because I don't think he lived too much longer than that, did he?
In a few more years. He lived into the mid-90s, I think, maybe 96, 97 kicked off. But I mean, yeah, he was already quite old by the time.
Yeah, he's extremely feeble, so thin and frail.
Mm-hmm. Which I guess fits again, because his character was supposed to be a guy that had been doing drugs even longer than the title character, Matt Dillon's character, Bob Hughes. So yeah, we've got Matt Dillon, who he'd been acting since he was pretty young, and The Outsiders is in '83, and that was a pretty big movie with a lot of, at the time they weren't names, but actors that, as they got older would sort of emerge to be name actors. But then I think it's fair to say that the rest of the '80s, he was mostly in stuff that didn't do well or wasn't popular or really seen. And I've at least heard some people say that this movie was sort of like righting the ship for his career, and that it sort of got Matt Dillon back on track because this movie was well received and everything. I'm not really sure what else he did in the '80s, but I don't think it was anything too significant, so it's probably accurate.
Rumblefish was '83 also, and not a whole lot, but it stands out to me.
Right.
But,
and go ahead.
Have you seen Over the Edge?
Yeah.
That's one I really enjoy, and he was even younger in that than he was in The Outsiders.
Oh, yeah, that's right. For some reason, I had the block. I wasn't even thinking about him. Who's the other person in that? Anyway, I was fixating on whoever else was the other person in that, and not him. But now that you mention it, yeah.
Michael Eric Kramer, maybe.
Maybe I thought it was a name I knew better. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I did see it, but yeah. No, I didn't think of him at all, but you're right. Again, that was '83, so back when he was probably around 20 or so. But I think this was a really good role for him, not just because of it being a good script and a good movie, but also I think it was a good casting choice, because even as he got older, he has that quality where he's really good at sort of playing kind of a lovable, rakish character, like a flawed character, but that people still find likable, and that's sort of, I think, the vibe you get from this character, this Bob Hughes, is that, he's kind of a junkie and his priorities are all screwed up, and then it's mostly, all about just getting high, and he'll break the law and all that, but you still find, you understand why he's the head of his crew, why they listen to him, and stuff like that. Jumping ahead a bit, there's a scene with his mother, and his mother's upset with his lifestyle, but she's sort of resigned to it. She doesn't come down too hard on him. And you think part of that is just, again, he's sort of got this sort of a charming way about him And I think that's, as I said, I think that's something that Matt Dillon's good at doing. He's done it in other roles too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think that scene is where you get your first look into, he's not such a nice guy after all. He is kind of an asshole. Because
Right.
his mom knows him and knows he's going to do whatever he can to steal whatever to sell for drugs or whatever.
Yeah, but then there's also his treatment of the youngest
Nadine.
Nadine. I keep getting mixed up which one's which because their names are basically an inverse of each other. You've got his wife, who is Diana or Diane.
Right.
So you got Diane and Nadine, which are sort of like inverted names. But yes,
we'll get into her later. I think that Diane's actually the villain in the film.
Yeah, but early on, you see, like I said, it's very clearly established he's the head of the crew, which consists of himself, his wife Diane, and then his friend Rick and his young girlfriend, implied to be underage. I'm pretty sure stated outright in the book underage. In this, they just sort of imply it. Nadine, and you sort of see the hierarchy there, and that Nadine's at the bottom, and he treats her as such, which she does eventually sort of come to fight back against.
I'm going to fight back by killing myself.
Spoilers.
But
yeah.
No, I mean, in his defense, she does do some stupid things, like when he's adding up, he's trading the heroin or morphine for crank.
For speed.
Yeah, and she corrects his math. Obviously he's trying to get a little better deal out of the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh man, obviously what he was trying to do. But
yeah, but at the same time, I sort of understood it. Like, I don't think she was just doing that. I think she was, even though she didn't like Dave. I mean, and it's kind of funny, but you see Dave as the sort of low the thug that's in there that he's making the deal with, and like it's not really to help Dave out, and Dave sort of shows his things because he wants to he offers like, how much of this can I give you for you to give me her? And then after that transaction happens, like, that's what he threatens her with. He says, if you ever like come between me and a deal again, I will sell you. You don't know if he's saying it for effect or not, but you do just start to believe it. And her boyfriend Rick is basically completely subservient to Bob. Does not stick up with her. Again, you can sort of see where her meltdown's coming from, because he never sticks up for her or anything like that. There's a great line later on that I think is so funny, when there's definitely some humor to be found in the movie. It's a drama, and it's about kind of fairly depressing stuff, but there's still some funny stuff. And one I liked some of the stuff that Rick says at this point, where they're driving along to do a job, and it's those three in the car together, and they're talking about if anybody sees them. And he's just like, it won't look suspicious. We'll just look like two, farm hands and a prostitute. Like that. And she just like punches him in the arm. And then Rick's line is, I always wanted to be on a farm, Bob. Or something like that. So that was great.
Yeah.
But the setup, just to let people know, the setup basically is, you've got this group, he calls his crew. They're all dope. They're all junkies, heavy drug users, and that's basically what their life revolves around. And like the title says, the main way they get their drugs and stuff is by like robbing drugstores and sometimes hospitals and stuff like that. And that's sort of how the movie was in. But we get a good amount of it first. And sometimes with these things, you've got like much more violent people. They're not violent people. These robberies are not violent. They don't even stick anybody up or threaten anybody. It's usually some sort of diversion, and while somebody's doing a diversion, somebody goes in and swipes stuff. The first drugstore robbery we see is the young Nadine faking some sort of epileptic seizure while Bob goes into the back and takes stuff. And this movie came out in '89, but it's set in the early '70s. It's set in 1971. And it's just one of those. It's just yet another example of it's so much harder to be a criminal these days, because it would have been so easy in the '70s to do so much stuff. Like there's no there's no cameras or anything, so he can just go into the back of a pharmacy and take stuff. And even when the cops do show up at their house, because they have a history of doing this, and the cops show up at their house, since they effectively hide the drugs and the cops can't find the drugs, they've got nothing.
Right.
Because they can't do anything.
Well, they're dusting for fingerprints and other things on the at the scene, and I think he was wearing gloves the whole time. So
yeah, and that's all you need to do. It's like also like in the 70s, like we look at, especially in the post 9/11 world, how they upped airport security. Like in the 70s, there were literally hundreds of like plane hijackings by terrorists and other criminals because you could just get on a plane with a gun and then like nobody could do anything about it.
Well, there was not really any check for your identity either. It was it was nothing.
Right. So it was a very good world in a way for certain criminals to flourish in, and you see that with these guys because you get the idea. They're junkies. They're not really particularly smart. They're not stupid either, but they're not they're not masterminds and stuff. But they're able to pull off what they need to pull off. It's implied he has been caught before and he has been in jail before, but obviously for nothing substantial. Again, coming back to the cops coming to the house, it's clear that the cops know him. He knows this cop Gentry, who's played by James Remar.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, and they're on a first name basis with each other. And he's kind of an interesting character too, because at first it seems like, the cops are somewhat corrupt. They're ready to, because he's like, you got a warrant. They don't show a warrant. They start smashing up the place.
And my warrant's on the tip of one of these hollow points.
Yeah, he even threatens him with the gun and stuff. And although to Bob's credit, he doesn't buy it. He doesn't seem intimidated. He doesn't seem to believe that of Gentry that that he would actually shoot him.
He did everything short of that.
Well, that's the thing, and then later on, there's a part where he's annoyed about something that we'll talk about. And he does have some of his other cops hold Bob while he punches him a few times, which is, that's not what a cop should do. But then later in the film, we actually see that he's concerned about Bob's safety.
Yeah.
And that he's happy that he's trying to turn his life around. So, it's sort of a good movie in that, the characters aren't black and white. They aren't all good or all bad or anything bad. It's more of an in-between thing. The stuff with the cops isn't the most important thing in the movie, but it's there.
Well, yeah, like you said, it's a different time. Police brutality was a thing that they weren't as closely watched as they are now.
Right.
And
certainly no body cams.
Oh yeah, no microphones, no body cams. But it's odd the drugstores. We're so used to, or at least here in the United States, I'm used to. Drugstores, having huge safes with the drugs in there, and because it is a big problem, people breaking in and stealing pharmaceuticals.
Very much so here too. Like you're not going to get behind the counter of a drugstore without like there being a camera on you. Like
cameras, but even when you get back there, you can't even get into it because it's some huge, bank-sized safe that the stuff is in, and that's been like as long as I've been aware of drugs.
Yeah. Not all drugstores even carry narcotics, so the ones that do, they're the ones that have even more precautions and stuff set up. And and the world that this is in the Pacific Northwest. This is in and around Portland, Oregon, and to movie's credit, that's where it's largely shot, which gives it some authenticity. As a person who's never even been anywhere near the Pacific Northwest, the movie does a good job of conveying it to me. I've always felt like that area seems to have a lot of space to it. It seems more wide open, less claustrophobic than the East Coast. And although I have to say, I live on the East Coast, but in Canada, at least where I normally live, or in Halifax, it's actually very similar to the Pacific Northwest in some ways. And one is that it's always fucking wet. It's always wet and clouded over and stuff like that. So I've always felt like people have called before Halifax sort of the Seattle of the East, and I can sort of get that it rains all the time. And you get a bit of that in this movie. Most of the time, everything seems pretty wet.
Yeah, totally. Ferns everywhere.
Yeah.
Wild ferns. But, man.
There's a forest. Yeah, there is a forest scene later on, too. Yeah. You get to see some of those big forests.
So much to talk about in this film. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but You know how the film takes the turn there when Bob decides to get cleaned up, and we can go back after I say this, but when he decides to get cleaned up, I really feel like they really tacked that ending on, because the real Fogel did not do that at all. He actually died in prison in 2012.
Oh, he was still in prison.
Yeah, he got arrested in 2011.
Oh, that's right. He got out and got back in. Okay.
Oh yeah. Every 3 years he'd go back in, and he finally got his final sentence in 2011 for, you guessed it, robbing a pharmacy.
Wow.
So yeah, he never quit.
As you see, it's a lot harder to do in 2011.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot harder to pull off.
Especially when you're like 80-something years old.
Right. So I guess, well, the film, it doesn't have a clear ending either, but yeah, it's sort of like uplifting, and that you think that he's going to stick on this path is more or less what the film leaves you with. Yeah, he was in prison still at the time, which I say it was based on the novel. The novel hadn't been published yet, so if people were seeing this film when it came out in 1989 and said, "Oh, that's a good movie, I would like to read the book," they actually had to wait a year.
Yeah, what's up with that? I mean, like, how did they even did he write a screenplay or something? Like, how did they even have the story?
Right. I saw something about that.
Maybe it was just not published. It was out there, just not published.
Yeah, that happens with some books, that's for sure.
Yeah, I saw that too. I thought that was interesting.
But no, I'm not sure. But I do know that, like, around the time, shortly before the movie was made, when Gus Van Sant had first sort of attracted Hollywood's attention from the success of his first movie, that independent movie, his Spanish title, Malanoche.
Oh, okay.
Malanoche. Okay, that's his first ever film, technically, was an independent film called that, and that got him some festival stuff. And anyway, and that was what got him some attention from Hollywood. And the first big studio he courted was Universal, and they actually rejected the script for this movie, and also My Own Private Idaho. They rejected both of those, and it wound up getting picked up by, I believe, Fox.
Okay. Yeah, I can see definitely My Own Private Idaho getting rejected by Universal.
Yeah, especially at that time.
Yeah,
they had,
totally.
If you look at like movies from that era that they were releasing, even like a drama, they weren't going to be like, tackling those sorts of subjects or that sort of content.
Well, we were talking about how this is one of his tamer films. And I guess it's just as he progressed, he started exploring that subject matter more and more.
Right, and I think that was another thing. Although I did see the movie, you're saying probably when I was a teenager or something like that, so it's not like, so there was a lot I couldn't remember about it. But so when I was thinking about it again, I was trying to remember, this being a film about, drug users and stuff. Some drug films get really in there and are very icky. This one's not really one of them. Like, it's in no way glamorizes drug use, but it's not that visceral as far as,
It's not Requiem for a Dream.
Yeah, it's certainly not that. And as we get into it, there's other films of that nature that I think it's interesting to compare them to. But even like stuff like showing people shooting up and stuff is something that I don't like needles particularly. I
don't like needle drugs at all. They freak me out, man.
Yeah, I mean, I always wondered like how far gone people have to be to like get to that level. Nobody really starts that way. And so this is drug users. They're drug users, and these guys are pretty open. They don't really have a drug of choice. That's why drugs are like, they like all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Whether it's pills or something you can shoot or whatever. And it's always interesting, and it's true. Like, this is true to life, and it's based on that. Like, when you think of like some of these people and how they're not educated or they're not that smart or whatever, but they know what they're. But if it's something they're interested in, they know it. And and Bob often displays a very awesome knowledge of like not only these drugs and their effects, but what their street value is and stuff. He talks about the Dilaudid and just how much money that was, and that was in the 70s, so it would have been a lot more.
Oh God, they don't even make. I mean, I don't think they make powdered Dilaudid anymore.
No, I don't think so.
Not in this country, anyway.
Yeah,
I mean,
probably not.
possibly in Mexico because they still make Quaaludes there. So
Note to self.
we should plan a trip, huh?
Yeah, south of the border, Mexico way.
Yeah. But yeah, you were talking about the knowing the drugs. I like the scene with William S. Burroughs was when he gives him the package there at the end that Diane gave him. So this is from all of us, and gives it all to him because he doesn't want the drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And he dumps it out on the bed and he pushes all of it but one thing. He said, "This is for squares. I never try that stuff." And then he pulls out the one bottle of the shit. Like, I just wonder what all that other stuff was. Like, the whole pile of pills and everything else.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's a lot of variety in that world, because that's the other thing about sort of drug users. Yeah, I'm sure it's true now too, but especially back then, is that not only were they adventurous, obviously, but they were creative. And towards the end, when you have those scenes with William S. Burroughs' character, Tom, who I think was a priest, and he's an older guy, and they tell you that this is a guy, he's a very old man here, and he's been using drugs all his life, so he's about as experienced as they get. And it sort of shows you the arc that, or at least one part of the arc, that like attitudes in North America towards drugs, because you have got like the explosion of it in the mid to late 60s with the psychedelic era and hippies and all that. And obviously the establishment wasn't happy about that, and other people weren't happy too. But it was more into this time, this is 1971, that it was that sort of campaign and crusade against drugs started to really get kicked up. This is 1971. If you went back maybe 5 or 6 years, people just didn't really get busted for this stuff as much. It was it wasn't like a priority of the cops. They had other things going on. It wasn't but this is now we're starting to see they're entering the era where, maybe because it's parents and stuff like that, where people are really starting to build up a tide of opposition or whatever to drugs and drug culture. And now I don't know if this is in the novel or what, if they just put this in because it's 1989. But Tom, in one of his little philosophical ramblings, says like he predicts that in the future, he says something like, "I predict the right wing will start like a very heavy campaign against drugs, to further their own agenda," which basically correctly predicts the war on drugs that the government would start in the 80s. And you and I are both old enough to remember some of that, and those commercials and PSAs and stuff. Like, this is 10 years before that, but you can see that this is the start of it. This is leaning towards it.
I thought that was a little trite, tacking that on like that. I mean, because I felt a little forced to me. I don't know. It's like, okay, I get what you're going for, but I mean, you're going to predict this shit like 10, 15 years before it actually happens.
I guess I was okay with it. I guess I got like the idea that this old man who, as Bob said, had maybe over time shot $1 million into his arm, had maybe attained some sort of clarity, where he could see. I don't know, maybe it is a little hokey, but I kind of did like it. Plus, it does fit a bit with William S. Burroughs himself. Not that that really matters. I don't know how many people watching the movie were that aware of him as a writer. But a lot of his writing, I'm sure, had a lot of stuff about drug culture, particularly in the 50s. Was his era that he was most known for. But lost my train of thought there, but I'm sort of meandering. But put me on that tack to think about how attitudes were shifting towards drugs in America and North America. How we had previously, just a few years before, you had sort of a much more open culture where people were like, "Oh, let's experiment and do this and that and the other thing." There were always, of course, people who disapproved, and there were things that were illegal, but I really think we were starting, the early 70s was really the shift where the demonization of drugs was really beginning, and got us to where we'd be, 10, 15 years later.
Yeah, street drugs with the growing popularity of legal pharmaceutical drugs, them handing Valiums out like candy.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's when that kind of shit started, and you know,
Yeah,
painkillers and
because before
everything
that,
else.
it was like, I guess it was more isolated, or maybe just because of just not knowing that earlier on people didn't seem to realize what they could do with it. But then, again, all that experimentation in the 60s and stuff, they realized, there's all these illegal drugs and stuff. It's like, wait a minute, legal drugs probably have all sorts of potential too. And what's it's led into that.
Yeah.
But as you said, I remember you said his Kelly Lynch played his wife Diane, who sort of does turn out to be, if you wanted to have a villain, in a way. And actually, from right at the start, he, in his little narrative right at the start, he has a line that basically lets you know how things are going to go, because he introduces her and he says, I loved her, and he says, and she loved dope.
Exactly. That's the perfect way to describe it.
That she, when it came down to it, she cared more about that than him.
Well, I mean, they were married. They weren't just hanging out. And then he says, "Oh, I want to do this," and she doesn't even like give it a split second of thought. She's just like, "Oh, well, I can't get clean. What the hell? You know, I can't do that." Like, not even a split second of, "Oh, maybe I can try that too," or whatever. And then she goes off and starts has a new fling with Rick.
Yeah, and again, it just sort of shows how even further deeply embedded she is into the lifestyle than he was, because to her it's unfathomable to get out of it. Exactly. And also, at first, again, like when I was describing the character and I said the likability and stuff like that, it seems to make sense because you think, he's sort of a take charge guy. He's got this sort of, he's always making out their plans and stuff, and he's got this sort of, I think, sort of likable personality. Plus, he's despite like his unhealthy lifestyle, and maybe this is prettied up a bit by the movie, but the character is a fairly handsome guy. And then the fact that she just like that, since he's gone, replaces him with Rick, who is weak-willed and not a take charge guy, not a leader, and not a handsome guy or anything like that. Like, this, what looks like a huge step down. But she just does it because that's what she's doing. So it's just like, oh, she's talking to him. She's like, what a crazy world, now I'm Rick's old lady. I'm like, yeah, you're Rick's old lady because it was the only thing you could think to do. Because exactly. you can't operate on your own, and you were too terrified to go with him and stuff. So yeah, she proves to be a weak-willed character for sure.
Yeah, I wrote down this quote, Bob, you know me. I may have been a lot of things, but I was never a tramp. I was like, that's exactly what you are.
Right.
Like,
and she proves that, whoever can get her access to drugs, she's pretty much shown that she will, be the old lady of, or whatever. And again, they look down on, and it's sad because they look down on Nadine as the least of them, but Nadine at least had something of a backbone.
Yeah.
And all she did was get criticized for it, and her boyfriend Rick does not stand up for her in the slightest. The nice things he says about her is finally too late. She's dead.
Yeah.
Because even though he has this quick turnaround, at first Bob seems very heartless when she dies. He says that he's angry at first that she managed to OD on something that he feels she stole. She shouldn't have had it in the first place. He says something like, the bitch got what she deserved. He said, very heartless and stuff like that. And finally Rick does sort of, stick up for her, and it's too late. She's gone. And he says, you can't say bad things about her. You can't do that. Well, maybe you should have said some of those things while she was still alive, Rick. Which is another thing that the movie sort of leaves ambiguous to you, too. Like, did she know she was going to take too much and kill herself? Or, to me, it seems like she did. Because it seems like she's so upset about what's happening and how she's being treated. And she thinks, here's a good fuck you. And not only will I be able to kill myself, but also take some of those drugs that they value so much, value more than me. I'll take those with me.
You could say that, but I mean, they also made it a point to say, he said at least once, "Oh, this stuff will kill you," and they made it a point to point out how weak her tolerance was, So I don't know. I guess you can interpret that however you'd like.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Again, you can interpret her that she's showing them that she can do it, or whatever.
The ultimate fuck you by like making you dispose of my body.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I could see that.
Yeah. Which is another sort of parallel with another movie that pretty much kind of does glamorize drugs in a way is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. We got a little parallel here in that like they both have like cops coming to a conference right where they are with all their drugs and stuff. Now this one isn't played for laughs as much as it could have been, because I guess they're following a true story or a supposed true story, but that's the complication. They've got her dead, and that's hard enough to dispose of, but they have to do it right under the noses of all these cops that have converged on the motel they're staying at. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly where his epiphany comes, because like I said, he's at first seems so heartless. He doesn't seem to care that she's dead. She's just an inconvenience, and look what she did now and stuff. And I guess it must have been once they get the body out towards the forest must be where he starts thinking when he insists on taking it by himself. Rick doesn't come with it. He's out there by himself in the woods, getting rid of, trying to bury her body, which is in a bag, like a body bag, like a garment bag. And
well, when he finally makes a decision, I think it's after he actually buries her.
Right.
He goes to a scene, really surreal scene with all sorts of hats flying around.
Right.
which
we didn't bring up. I was going to say, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the quirks of his personality, and it sort of goes with a heavy drug user, is that he's really superstitious and has weird superstitions. And you first find this out when they're watching TV and something reminds somebody of a dog, and Nadine says she would really like to have a dog, and he kind of flips out about it, and then he and Diane tell a story about how years ago, before they joined up with, I guess, Rick and Nadine, the two of them had a dog that they loved very much, but during a heist, things went wrong, and they got separated from the dog. The dog actually wound up helping the cops find them, which led them to jail. And I guess because life is awful and cruel, and maybe again it's the 70s, what happened? The cops actually just send the dog to get put down, which seems awful. It's like, why couldn't they find a home for it or something? But anyway, all this reflects on is they think it's a very bad luck to even mention dogs. And when she does, he says that she's now put a hex on them.
30-day hex.
And he thinks that he thinks specifically it's a 30-day hex. And when they, express that that's kind of weird and stuff, they say, is there anything else? He said, well, since, you screwed us up for the next 30 days, we can talk about, some other things that you shouldn't do. And his big one, and it's pretty funny to listen to, is where he talks about hats. He's just, I don't want to see any hats on any beds. To him, that's the worst thing. And it's never explained what, and that one doesn't even have a backstory. So you don't know if there's some weird happenstance that happened with a hat on a bed, or if it's just, something that he decided on his own.
I kind of researched this just a little bit, and it actually is a thing.
Okay.
It's in a few different cultures, Italian, Indian. But one of the theories there is that it slows the spreading of lice.
Okay.
You don't put your hat directly on the bed. But another is just that putting a hat on the bed is associated with death for some reason. I don't know why, but that's some of the stuff I was able to find. So,
right.
And I don't know. You're dead, so you put your hat on the bed. I don't know. I don't get that.
And that is what she does right before she takes the drugs.
Fuck you! Bam!
She puts the hat on the bed, I guess, to just prove that it doesn't mean anything to Rick, who still won't back her up. And the first thing Bob does when he comes into the room is he doesn't even see her body at first. He just says, "Is that a hat on a bed?" And he says, like, and then he brings it up again during when they see that she's dead. And he's like, "Oh, that hat on the bed!
Somebody get that hat off the bed!"
Yeah, and
that's hilarious.
What I thought at the time was, well, this makes sense within the parameters of, a junkie, that they would be paranoid and have weird ideas and rant about things. But even when he gets clean, he seems to cling to his superstitions, because he brings up other times about that still believing that the hex was a real thing and that
Yeah.
the hat on the bed was a really bad thing, which I thought was kind of funny. So I guess either it just got deeply ingrained on him or what, but that it wasn't just all the drugs, that he just had these superstitions regardless.
It's dogs, hats, and mirrors. You never look at the backside of a mirror.
Yes. And he gives a little rant about that doesn't really make any sense, which again is sort of consistent with that kind of character you'd expect, because he says something about like you're seeing yourself and you're not supposed to see yourself, and he's like, but wait, no, you're seeing yourself backwards and you're not supposed to see yourself back or something, and it just all sounds like complete nonsense.
Yeah.
And Nadine is the only one that seems to pick up on this. Rick has either accepted it and tuned it out. Diane seems to genuinely believe it, in that I think she just believes anything Bob says because he's the leader and he's the one that can get the drugs. But it's weird. She's got some inconsistencies of herself, because early on, after their first score, which goes pretty well, she seems to act more like a lot what you might expect from a lot of more casual drug users. It's like, we have drugs, now we can have some fun. And she wants to maybe have sex with him. And he is completely non-responsive to it. It's like his sex drive's just been destroyed. He puts off her advances completely, and all he can think about is and even though they've scored, as he said, they got all he can think about is the next job.
Yeah. Well, he
Totally
doesn't get off
that.
on sex. He gets off on the thrill of
right.
the robbery and the high of the drugs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if is it just trying to make a point that you do lose your sex drive when you're a drug addict or whatever. But
I don't know if it's specifically that, but it's just more that the idea is he's so fixated on this one thing that all other things fall away, whether it's sex or something else. And sex is a good one because he's a young man and stuff. Which is usually a pretty big deal to young men, and they're saying, and he has a fairly attractive wife who who wants to be with him, and here he is completely rebuffing her advances because he's fixated on the next robbery, the next score, and he's saying, all I can see, man, are like those like bottles of pills and stuff. He says like that's what's dancing in his eyes, and he at one point like he does kiss her, but it's just sort of to like make her stop.
Yeah.
I
actually have a theory about that. I think that her and that Diane and Rick kind of hooked up or had a connection in the car when they were waiting for him to get out of the hospital, for that long period of time. He was stuck in the ladies' restroom.
Right.
I think because she made it a point one time to say he's usually in and out quick like a rabbit, and that's not just for stuff like this or something like that.
Yeah, so, she makes like a sexual entendre there.
And, I feel like maybe they had some sort of connection there, which, she was already planning on maybe leaving him for Rick anyway.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. But it's a weird thing because she's unhappy with him because of his fixation on the drugs. And, because it'd be nice to have sex sometime. But then the only thing that would make Rick attractive to her in the first place is if he can, effectively run the crew and get drugs, because again, then she'll just move on to whoever is what she's shown. Well, because Rick is just so weak-willed throughout it. Like Rick just does whatever he's just a total follower. He doesn't stand up for his own girlfriend, stuff like that. Yeah. So it's a real, you see like just like how committed she is to this, that she, immediately just moves to Rick because, well, he's there and he's still in the lifestyle and that's what works for her. Mm-hmm. Even though they make it pretty clear that, he's not nearly like sort of the alpha male or anything that Bob was. Mm-hmm. But as soon as Bob says that he's leaving, like he's pretty much dead to her. Although she does come back, but I think she only comes back to just try to tempt him one more time. Mm-hmm. And then you see the weird reverse because she offers him drugs and he doesn't want them. Mm-hmm. And then he would very much like to reconcile with her physically, and he kisses her, and then she says, I have to go. So they've almost sort of switched roles there. Yeah. Where now Bob is starting to realize, he had a real tangible relationship and it was worth something, and all he was fixated on was the drugs. And she's saying, yep, drugs. Screw the relationship, drugs. So, yeah, you get a bit of a reversal.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I feel like it should have ended before that end sequence there. It should have ended at Diane's death, or at Nadine's death.
To leave you wondering what they were going to do after that?
Yeah, I do, because I just feel like they kind of wrapped it up nicely. You know, I feel like that's something that maybe the studio wanted him to do. I don't know that for a fact. I'm just guessing, but it seems like they wrapped it all up nicely. Like, oh, now he's got his life on track, and you know, I don't know.
I suppose, but I mean, they didn't try to, fool us by saying that now that he enters a methadone program and he seems to successfully kick drugs, and they set him up with a job. But I mean, they do show us that this didn't just turn his life around amazingly, because now he has like no one to hang out with. He's lost his wife. He's working a fairly unfulfilling job, and he's living in a kind of crappy little squat apartment. Where that's another thing where it sort of has a departure from other movies. They seem to be able to afford at least decent places to live. They aren't living in squalor or anything like, it's not like Train Spotting. You look where those guys were living, in like the filthiest hovels you could imagine. Where in this, they seem to be getting by okay. And it's not until he gets clean that he's now actually living in a much more dingy place. And so they do sort of at least make a point of showing that, like, he didn't magically suddenly have this great life, and that it was actually very difficult for him. And his only friend is Tom. And it's funny because Tom is actually completely in no way interested in cleaning himself up either. So he's still got one foot in there, but he's a strong enough character, I guess, to resist the drugs. Because I think the first time you see the movie, you do sort of wonder what he's going to do with that package of drugs that Diane delivers. And he very quickly just gives it over to Tom, who's like, "Bless you, son." It's pretty funny. And then, of course, we come to the ending where because he's still attached to the lifestyle, even though he tried to get out of it, he does wind up getting shot.
Yeah.
Not fatally, and he still has another problem hanging over his head. As we said, the cop Gentry seems genuinely pleased that he's trying to change, and doesn't harbor any ill will about the fact that he couldn't arrest him at the time, and he's now actually trying to give him a heads up about the cop that had been making threats, that he very much he doesn't want to see this cop hurt him. So he's got that hanging over his head too. So I don't think the ending's as neat and tidy as all that, because he's in an ambulance having been shot by a thug that wanted drugs he didn't have. He's still got a cop out there, if not more cops, that want to do him harm. And again, he's cut off from the life he knew and doesn't have much to fall back on except like a crappy job and an old junkie priest to talk to.
Yeah, and of course Dave, the one who shot him. So I don't know. I really hated that character too.
Yeah, he's just a little.
I mean, obviously nothing to like there, but
no, not at all.
But yeah. This was actually on Roger Ebert's list for best films from 1989.
Yeah, Siskel's too.
It was I think Siskel's number 3 and Ebert's number 2. And I read Ebert's review on his website, and
I probably should have done that.
Man, that guy! I mean, he's praising the film out of one side of his mouth and just like shitting on it out of the other side. It's so crazy how he's able to do that. Like,
what was his criticism?
Well, he was just talking about all the characters are losers, and just, I mean, I don't know, just degrading when I don't really feel that's the case. But I don't know. That was just one example of how he did that. But
yeah. Well, I mean, the characters kind of are, but at least they make the point that within the context of this movie, that Bob is, trying to do something about it. He's broken out of that. He's trying to change, and he's still young enough to have a good life.
But that's one of the reasons why I never really cared for Roger Ebert's style of reviewing, because he is always kind of like, it's like backhanded comments, or like, I don't know.
No, I know what you mean.
I'm trying to think of the right terminology for it, but he's praising something, but at the same time, talking about its flaws.
But he's a little overly snobbish when it comes to some of these things for sure. I mean, not to turn a thing into
That's
Roger Ebert. I have a lot of
no,
criticisms
but
of him, but a lot of them actually didn't. And you got more to the heart of it is like his, the way he critiques films. Usually, I'm just more critical of him because of what he likes or doesn't like.
right.
I'm like, how could he have liked this, or how couldn't he have liked that? Which well, whatever. Remember, movies are subjective, so what am I doing? But yeah, it's perfectly valid to take issue with perhaps the way he chooses to criticize or even praise a film.
But it's like, oh, this is one of the best films of the year. These losers in this horrible, disheveled house, live like slobs, or it's just really weird the way he writes. But
yeah, it's true though, because I mean, a lot of the times, if something like unpleasant happens in a film, he acts like that's like something that the director could have just like left out.
Yeah.
Like, even though it might be like really important to the plot, or be like the theme that's running through it. Because sometimes they'll just be like, "This is ugly," or "This thing isn't fun," or something like that. It's like, well, it's supposed to be ugly. It's not supposed to be fun.
Exactly.
Or stuff like that. And yeah, I get it. And, yeah, I see what you're saying, because he's just like, "Oh, why should we care about these losers?" Well, the movie's about drug using losers. Like,
right.
That is the film. Whether it's done well or not, that's whatever what it is.
Hey man, these may be losers, but I knew people exactly like this, that actually had lifestyles like this too. That were people I considered friends. So I don't know.
That was the other thing. I didn't know how much to talk about, but it did make me reflect on my own somewhat vanilla experiences with drugs when I was younger, and people that use drugs. And I can say right now that I was never heavily into drugs, but there were, a few years of my life where at least it was sort of part of my life. And again, these were not very hard drugs. We're talking.
There's still time to change that.
We're talking about like marijuana, some forms of acid, mushrooms, pretty much. And the one thing, but there were some things in the movie that still I could even relate to, even as somebody that was never a big part of my life or anything. But it helped me reflect on some of the reasons why I stopped doing those things. And the number one reason, honestly, and I'm not kidding, and people think that was, and it comes through in this movie. What this movie shows you was like right at the beginning, like, well, first of all, you have this group that you think is so tight knit, and then you see that they're kind of not, because when they come back after their first score, you might think, okay, now I have a scene of them like all like really enjoying themselves and stuff. But instead you see them very militantly splitting up each person's share and sort of even bickering over it. And again, you get to see how Nadine's at the bottom, and she, like, the two people that really did things in the drugstore robbery were her and Bob. She creates a diversion by faking the seizure, and he goes in and swipes it. Now, he's right when he berates her and says that he's the one taking most risk. He is. But she's still, taking some risk, and she still has to perform a job. She has to do somewhat convincingly, otherwise people will see through it and be like, what the hell's going on, and realize it's a scam. Like, so at least takes a little bit of talent. And then she does rightly point out that Diane didn't do shit. And Diane goes, really? Is that what you think? As if, and then, like, she doesn't actually have a rebuttal for it. Her rebuttal is like, screw her, Bob. Let's take her share. Like, that'll teach her to like question me and the hierarchy and stuff like that. So you see right on that, even though they're supposed to be friends in this group, like, when it comes down to it, it is about the drugs, and they're not even generous with each other about sharing. It's all about like deciding exactly how they're going to split it up.
I think that's all the more lifestyle of a junkie too, being really selfish and
right. And the point I was trying to get into was, so you see that, and then right after that, you see them dealing with Dave, and they don't like Dave. They don't like him. He's unpleasant to deal with, and he, you can see exactly why. If you had to choose between the two groups, you would take them over Dave. He's a lot less sympathetic than they are. Even if you want to argue they're not that sympathetic and you don't like junkies, you'd say, I'd rather, if I had to choose, I'd take them over Dave. And honestly, that was probably the biggest reason why I kind of stopped recreationally using drugs, is because I just kept finding myself in situations with with people that I didn't want to be around.
Yeah.
But I had to be, because they were the ones that had the drugs or were, and it just got to me. I was just like, this isn't even worth it, is sort of how I started to feel. And then, as I got a little more clear about it, I was just like, I don't even need it in the first place, and all that other good stuff, it's like, I don't need to get high, blah, blah. But I think like that was sort of like the main thing. Like, again, since I was never, much of a user, was never really an issue for me. It wasn't like I ever had this big epiphany where I had to like, I have to stop. But, if the closest I came to that probably was thinking like, I don't need to do this anymore, and have to bother with these people, whether it's a drug dealer or this people, because so many of them are unpleasant and definitely not my friend, and that was really, like I said, that was probably the biggest reason I had for stopping that eventually.
Yeah, definitely.
So I could relate to the movie, at least as far as that goes, on that level. I never had to see any of the more dangerous sides of it or anything like that. But I mean, obviously I could have, just like anybody. This is in a specific place, but one thing that's kind of sad is like, no matter where you live, there's a thriving like drug culture, that's not even that far under the surface. I'm here in my hometown now over the holidays, and there's a lot of people with drug problems here. It comes up on the news a lot when they talk about arrests and stuff like that. And my mother's church, I know that she's heavily involved in that church, so she's there at different points of the week. But specifically when they're having meetings and stuff on certain nights, they have to sort of be careful, because there's like a drug rehab group that comes in, and they try to be very respectful of that, because part of it is like it's supposed to be anonymous, so you really don't want to see the people coming in and out and stuff like that. So so that's very present too and stuff. So so that's what I think about the movie, is that even if you're somebody like me who only very, very on the surface dabbled in things, and was never involved, but like you said, you even through whatever you were doing, you still met people and interacted with people that were very much like that and very much into that. So I think that the movie's good at that.
I've met people like Dave.
Yeah.
And I hated him.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, Dave just reminds me of like pretty much every stupid drug dealer that I knew in a cursory fashion.
This was 1989.
Yeah.
The same year as Roadhouse. Kelly Lynch was in Roadhouse.
I haven't seen her in very much.
I haven't either. But yeah, I knew she was in something else, and that is Roadhouse. And of course, she's blonde in that movie.
No, yeah. I wouldn't have known if you had said, but now that I picture it, yeah, I see.
And very nude.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't really recognize anything else she's ever done. A lot of TV stuff.
89 was a pretty good year. I had some pretty big movies, like Glory.
Oh, she was in Cocktail in 88.
I saw that movie 100 years ago, but I don't remember it. It's one that gets talked about a lot, even though I don't know why. I guess just because of Tom Cruise being such a big star at the time. But I mean, it's a movie about bartenders. But okay.
People are trying to bring that style of bartender back, where they throw bottles around and shit. Whatever they call that is the name for it.
Yeah, I
don't know. I mean, yeah, go for it.
Sure. Yeah, all the pageantry of a magic show with giving you booze. I guess I can see the appeal. Sure, yeah.
As long as I know there's potential for me to get hit in the head with a bottle of vodka, I want to watch it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, is there anything else you wanted to talk about here? Did you want to compare this to any other drug films?
Well, sure. Like I said, it's interesting because it's not a completely dark, bleak movie. And as far as like drug films go, while it shows you that it's not a glamorous lifestyle, it doesn't get it doesn't get as rough or icky as it could in that either. It sort of strikes a certain balance in there. And again, if you want to compare it to like something like Train Spotting, where Train Spotting really gets in there and shows you just sort of how gross things can be and stuff like that. But at the same time, Train Spotting still had the lighter tone. It had a lot more jokes going on and stuff like that.
Train Spotting's very much an anti-drug movie, I think. Or at least it is to me.
I think so, because it's a big juxtaposition, you know, say of like what people imagine drugs like to be like and how great it is to be high or whatever like that, and then sort of showing you like the grim reality of it and
being so high you forget your baby is asleep in the next room.
Right, and exactly, it's a weird movie in that way because it has sort of it's a dark comedy, but I mean it doesn't pull any punches at the start. Very early on, we have the death of a baby, you know, very sad, serious thing. And but that movie is a little more, in some ways, a little more accessible just because it's in a prettier package. It's got like the pop soundtrack and stuff like that, which I mean I understand why. The soundtrack of this movie is very low key, which I think fits. It's sort of a low key movie by Elliot Goldenthal, and then you've just got like some pop songs in, but again they're mostly sort of low key songs of the era of the early '70s. Just a few of them.
Yeah, I was going to mention there's a lot of saxophone in there, and during the hospital scene when he's trying to escape from the I guess the orderlies, whoever's chasing after him.
Right.
The saxophone is just going crazy on the soundtrack.
Well, I think most of us just think the saxophone is kind of synonymous with drugs. You think of those jazz musicians, right?
Sure.
And they were all like on like heroin and stuff like that. So that to me. And the other thing that comes through in like the less frantic scenes is just sort of like that meandering piano. To me, that really sums, like, as somebody who didn't live in the '70s, but when I see certain things or hear something, like I hear that, like I think part of it comes from the credits from that show, the Archie Bunker Show.
Oh, okay.
Remember how the end credits, it's just like a camera panning down like a neighborhood, and then you've got like this sort of slow, groovy piano playing? That embedded in my mind very early on as a child, like that's the '70s. So, and things like that, and that would like appear throughout all sorts of TV and film, either of the era or made later on, like this one, showing you the era. And that's sort of what nailed it down for me. You know, it's shot in Portland, and they kind of proved that there's definitely big sections of Portland that in 1989 were pretty much the same as they were, 20 years earlier. That a lot hadn't really changed. There's not too many anarchisms in the movie. I remember reading, even before I watched it, like there's an HBO sign somewhere, and I looked for it and I didn't see it.
It was an HBO what?
There's like a sign that like advertises HBO, I guess, like a billboard or something like that.
Okay.
But I didn't see it. Like I looked for it and I didn't see it. So the anarchisms are definitely kept to a minimum. Everything looks pretty '70s. The big cars.
Yeah, they did a great job of that.
And
of it feeling like the '70s.
Yeah, but
there's
that
the
piano
end credits. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that piano throughout is really the thing that nails it down for me. I don't know why, but there were just certain images and certain sounds from when I was younger, and I guess they just all get jumbled together with that, and it just sort of says '70s for me. Like it's kind of a weird thing. Again, as somebody that was born in the early '80s, is that it's almost like, and this is off topic and just a weird thing about me, that like that era of at least the mid '70s, almost to the beginning, the early '80s that I couldn't possibly remember. It's almost like it's like a past life I had, or that I keep seeing it in dreams, because I really feel like I felt like I lived it, even though I didn't. It's a weird thing, and that's the only one. That's the only era, and it's a very specific era, and it's also North America. It's definitely Canada or the U.S. It's not somewhere else. It's the way those cities looked, and cars and things like that, and neighborhoods and such. And I don't know. That might just come. I think now, if I want to psychoanalyze myself, I think what it comes from is being a really, really, really young child in the early '80s when stuff was still kind of like that, and some of the earliest dreams I had. I think maybe that's what it is. But anyway, that's a little thing that doesn't have anything to do with anything really, but people can enjoy that as a little tangent on my part. But just because it's just a weird thing, and it's one of those things that makes movies like this always sort of stand out to me because it's set in that era. And I always feel like that era is something like I walked through once in a dream or some bullshit like that.
Maybe it's just that you've seen so many films from that era, like, fairly early in your life, or films and TV shows and stuff like that.
Yeah, probably. Like I said, and especially I think because some of them I was so young that I can't remember them fully now, so I couldn't say which is which. I think that's some of it too. That's ambiguous. That like I don't have a specific name for any of them. And that's maybe why it feels like like just a thing instead of anything specific, I guess. Because I was so young that I can't remember what movie it was or what show it was. It was just the way things looked for a while or sounded. Also, my father's office, which burned down in 1999, back when he had a private practice downtown. His office, like right up to the day it burned down, was basically a snapshot of the 70s, except for there being like some computers in there. The decor and everything was just total 70s from like when it first went up. Like it just stood still. It had all the 70s furniture and stuff, and
oh wow,
and various like art on the wall, like pop art that was like of that era in the 70s, like little lawyer cartoons and stuff. And I think that was part of it too. Remember like spending time in that office as a young kid, and yeah, apart from like some computers and stuff, everything was very 70s. The furniture and stuff. It was a big office. Like it was a series of rooms. There's like a conference room, smaller thing. Like it was a big area. And I just have memories of being a little kid and sort of wandering around it by myself in sections that were empty at the time. And I think that might even be where it started. And it just seemed to remind me of that era. But yeah, pretty cool.
There's a reggae track that plays over the end credits by Desmond Decker, which I'm not familiar with his work or anything, but
is that the Israelite song?
Yeah.
See, I always knew that song because it was on a tape of like hits from the 70s that my parents would play in the car.
Okay.
So I always knew that song. So I was sort of pleased to hear it again in this movie because what it was it's I don't know if he's speaking English. I don't think he is in all of it. But I would just make up phrases that it sounded like. Like there's a part where it goes high, where it goes da 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 da, and I used to sing "Lasagna, I Love Ya."
Oh wow, yeah, that's got to be it.
And there's a part where he's like just doing like a repeating part where before he goes to the Israelites, and I used to repeat it as "I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored of." Like I would just fill in the words to amuse myself with what I thought it sounded like. So it was fun. I mean, I hadn't heard that song in forever, so it was kind of fun hearing that song. Yeah, it's played at one part when they first go on the car trip to break out of the hex, and then they play it again over the credits.
Oh, okay. I didn't catch that it was played before.
Yeah, but that's a song I always just enjoyed. Yeah, it was just on some tape of like various songs from the 70s that used to get played in the car. And
it's English, but it's kind of odd phrasings.
Yeah, I mean, you can make out the English in lots of parts, like the part where he says, "I don't want to end up like Bonnie and Clyde." Yeah. That's very clear. But other parts, like it's very the way things are enunciated. But yeah,
Lasagna, I love you.
Yeah, I always got a kick out of that song.
Lasagna, I love you. I think is like a Garfield. I think Garfield would probably sing that song.
Yeah. That's probably why I said it. I was also a Garfield fan. But yeah, but I think it definitely fits the vibe of the movie. It's a low key sort of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was a little bit out of place the first time when I watched it, but yeah, I think I did enjoy it more the second time, that the song in particular. But yeah, this is definitely an anti-drug film. I feel like it's one that you may want to watch to prevent yourself from becoming a junkie. I don't know.
Yeah,
it doesn't really glamorize the lifestyle as I don't know. I guess Fear and Loathing might.
Yeah, no, it's true because Because I mean, these are people that are fully committed junkies. You know, they don't have day jobs. Right. They're into that, and even though it seems like they're doing okay, that you see the problems not just within themselves, but like they're clashing with the cops. The cops haven't been able to arrest them yet, but they're it's a constant threat. Right. And it also shows like they have some jobs go really well, but then the hospital job is a complete wash. He doesn't wind up getting anything.
Yeah, unfortunately. But
so they just they show you that too.
I can think of a lot of films that do kind of glamorize, but at the end, there's always some falling out at the very end. They get addicted and lose everything they have or whatever, like Boogie Nights or something.
Right, but this movie doesn't really follow that arc, which is what I like, because they don't really show the times are good now either.
Right.
Like I said, when they first come, you never really see them enjoying the drugs that much. Like it just seems to just make them more paranoid or more fixated on the next time. Like, she wants to have sex with him, and they don't have some great, narcotics-induced lovemaking. They just have him going, no, I'm focused on the other stuff. Like, so there's not really any. Like in a lot of those movies, like where they'll often show people who are really high, really, doing crazy things or having great sex or whatever, like that doesn't exist in this movie. Everything is still very mundane. And like I said about how you have these characters that may be losers, like Roger Ebert presents them as, but they get very fixated and they become experts on what they're doing. But it's just very repetitive, and there isn't sort of any sort of real payoff. It's just a cycle. And he says something like that at the beginning in the opening narration. He says like it's a game that you play, but you can't win. Because it's like the idea again of always sort of chasing the next high and stuff. But it gets sort of less satisfying the more you do it. You build up tolerance, and
it just sounds like an awful way to live. Like you're not even enjoying the drugs anymore. It's more like I need to do this to get more drugs so I can not feel bad.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely what you get from his character, I think, for sure. And the mother is very honest with them about that, like and it just shows like how oblivious Diane is to this sort of stuff, because later on when he says he's leaving and stuff, she's just like, no, I can't do that, like it's not even an option. And then earlier, you get the feeling that even though he doesn't say it, that Bob at least understands that he is causing his mother's pain. I think he does understand why. At the time, he's still sort of just, well, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. But he does at least seem somewhat cognizant of it. Whereas Diane, like, in a moment with the mother, like, says, why do you hate me and Bob? Like, what have we ever done to make you hate us? Like, she's so oblivious. And the mother slams, I don't hate Bob. I don't hate you. But what you're doing, isn't going to work. And she says something like, you're adults now and you just think you can play like children. She's like, you can't just spend your life running around playing. And Diane just sort of stares back at her blank face. Like, it's made no impression on her, you can tell. Like, Diane has no idea what she's talking about. Like, it meant nothing to her. And, Bob's not present at that moment. But he does sort of, I think, come to realize that's himself later on. But Diane, she's just so deep in it that it doesn't seem like she's ever going to have a wake-up call. Because right in the aftermath of Nadine's death, she seems more upset than Bob.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it sticks with him.
Right.
But it doesn't stick with her. It's just like, well, that can happen. Time to move on. Okay, now I'm with Rick, she just shakes it right off to get back to what she's doing.
Yeah, I really dislike her character. I really do. But I was going to say real quick, the makeup on Heather Graham when she's dead looks amazing.
It's a very pretty corpse.
But I mean, even the contacts, it looks so real.
Yeah. Yeah. It's too bad Heather Graham doesn't get to do a lot in this movie. I mean, she just sort of, that's the role and stuff, but I'd recommend it to people that are maybe interested in seeing her that young. It's kind of cool. I don't know how young she was in it, but again, they imply the character's underage, and you could see that. Because in the film, like the cops say, like, how old is she? And you can tell how like rehearsed it is. It's like, you're 22, and she's like 22, and everyone's like 22, like as if it was something they like decided on and rehearsed back and stuff. But you know, you could definitely buy, if she might have been a little older for the role. I'm not sure. You could buy her as a teenager for sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. What is this, License to Drive? Right around that same period of time.
Yeah, and I mean it's probably part of, not to say that there aren't attractive drug users, but it's probably a little bit of that Hollywood thing, in that we've got you know, the likes of her, or not Jacob Dylan, sorry. Well, yes, Jacob Dylan's quite good looking too. Yeah, he was in his time. But Matt Dillon. But again, I don't know what James what's his name looked like, but
License to Drive was 88. So.
Right.
What, James LaGrosse or whatever his name is?
Yeah, James Fogle.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But yeah, I still think it sort of stands on its own when you stack it up against other drug movies. I was thinking about Trainspotting. I was thinking about Requiem for a Dream. Earlier, you'd mentioned a film that is the most similar to it probably is Basketball Diaries.
Mm-hmm.
The Leonardo DiCaprio movie, which is also a movie based on a true memoir by a real drug user, a bit younger, and that was a guy that really did manage to turn his life around. As far as I know, he stuck with it. That movie's definitely more visceral than this one, though.
Yeah.
Because one thing they really don't show you, which is too bad, is like, because when Bob decides he's quitting drugs, he knows he can't just do it, because what he says to I.M. when he decides she's not coming with him, he says, you know, take what you want, just leave me enough to make it home, because he knows, like, he can't do that by himself. Like, there's obviously the withdrawal issues. They don't really focus on the withdrawal stuff, though. He just seems to do okay. He gets into that methadone program, and he handles it. And if there's supposed to be scenes, or if in the memoir, like, you know, he's being racked with pain or whatever and stuff, like, they don't really show that. Like, the transition is a little too smooth, maybe. I mean, especially if you compare it to something like Basketball Diaries, where you have Leonardo DiCaprio and his friend, I can't remember, but the older guy, the black guy, like, basically is locking him up. And he's like all drenched in sweat and screaming at him. He's like, I fucking hate you, and stuff like that. Like, you really see, like, what, like, withdrawal is really like for these people. And they just sort of gloss over it in this movie, which I don't necessarily think it's bad, but it is a little weird when you think about it, that it's just like, oh, I'm in this clinic now and I'm fine. Even though he's supposed to be one of the most hardened drug users, he says to the woman when he's registering, she's like, how long have you been using drugs? He's like, all my life.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of glad they didn't, because I've seen that before, and I don't know, they could have just put like 8 weeks later or some shit, you know, across the bottom. It, you know, time didn't really matter. We just know it had sometime in the future after he had already kicked it, because, yeah, it's not an easy transition going from what he was on to just methadone. It's not a pleasant thing for people, I don't think.
Right. And I think, yeah, if they had gone that way, it probably would have messed with the tone a little bit. Yeah. Even though we had seen a young woman overdose and die, but still, there's levels. And you get stuff like Requiem for a Dream, Basketball Diaries, and they're a bit more visceral than this movie. And this movie doesn't need to be visceral. It's more a character study. Yeah. It's more a low key thing. You know, it's as important as the drugs are in it. There's not a lot of scenes of, again, them necessarily using the drugs. They just sort of introduce it at the start. Then the rest is just like, okay, well, you know what they're doing. They're doing drugs.
Yeah, it was just like the one shot, I think, of somebody shooting up at the beginning. It was him in the car ride back from robbing the pharmacy, yes. And then I think another scene shortly after that of a close-up of it. But
the rest of it was just like getting drugs. It wasn't doing the drugs. Yeah. It was like grabbing them.
You know what's happening here.
Yeah,
no reason to show that. But
yeah, I think it definitely works.
Yeah. But you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, sure. So Gus Van Sant would do My Own Private Idaho after this. This is sort of the movie that put him on the map. As far as movies going forward, you don't really see a lot of overtones of this one later on. I mean, I guess if I had to think about it, you can still see some elements, but it's, you know, well, for one thing, obviously, that people have pointed out, it's true that, you know, certain of his movies will talk about will focus on like homosexual characters and talk about society, how it views homosexuals and that sort of stuff. That's not in this movie. It's not about that. So so you don't see that really going forward. So that it makes it stand out from some of those other movies. But still, it does have its fingerprints on it. I think the way he directs his actors and stuff. It's hard for me to pin down in a tangible way the similarities between this and later films.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to say something vague like it just sort of has that feel, but it does sort of just have that feel is kind of what I want to say when I look at some of those other movies that, you know, that he directed. And I'm not really sure what it is because he's not, you know, he's not one of those directors that's known for necessarily a certain visual style. It's just more, I think, the narrative and the characters.
Yeah, this was his first feature or his first studio feature, so
yeah,
you know, it was kind of a work in progress for him as well. So
yeah, very much so.
But you know, great. You know, I thought turned out really good. It's very easy for me to watch, and that's kind of rare. You know, especially these days. My attention span seems like it's getting shorter and shorter lately. But yeah, I've watched this film a few times in the past few days, and just, you know, really been captivated every time. So
I think it's got yeah, it's definitely well put together. You know, there aren't any scenes that feel unnecessary, really. I mean, you can debate about some of the last scenes and say that, you know, maybe it could have ended sooner, but it doesn't. It's not long anyway. It's not like one of those movies like, you know, the scenes all, to me at least, felt like they were necessary. You know, in the sequence that they were told and stuff. And even though it has a couple of those sequences where, you know, it's sort of about his state of mind, and you might see stuff like floating by, like the hat and stuff like that. There's not as much as that as you might think, actually. Like, that's not overdone. That's, you know, that's done a couple times, and it doesn't go too far. You know, something that some of these drug movies can do is they get a little self-indulgent with those sorts of things. Like, they want to show you a trip, or they want, you know, you to listen to, like, you want them to you to listen to, and this movie has a narrative, but he doesn't really go on any rants in his narrative or anything like that. You know, they just basically let you know that he's got some scattered weird thoughts, but they don't go crazy with it and stuff, or pontificate the way they might in like Trainspotting, like the opening of Trainspotting, where he's like making this like big point about society and today's society and how, you know, fucked up it is, I guess, is perhaps is what he sees it like. This doesn't really have any of that. It's not really about society that much. Again, at the end, you do have a bit of Tom talking about that shift that I think did happen around that time of where drugs are trying to get a lot more demonized, and you know, law enforcement was taking it more seriously and stuff, and how it led to a lot of the problems that would happen later on. But you don't have to think about that too much. But yeah, and I guess the other thing is it's got pretty good dialogue. It's not like clever, snappy dialogue. It's not Tarantino, but I guess it's just that you feel like the dialogue fits. Like, they seem basically like real characters in the real world, and they aren't just spouting lines and one-liners and, you know, jokes and stuff like that. They're just sort of reacting to the world around them in what seems like a more or less realistic way. You know, like the least realistic thing going on is maybe when he plays sort of that prank on the cops, sets them up.
Yeah.
Turn out any lights downstairs that aren't turned up.
Sure. Sorry about that.
But yeah, that was one of the funnier parts of the movie, I thought.
Yeah, because I had definitely forgotten it. You know, and it was only when I was watching it again for this that like I remembered what he does. He sends the cops. He sends the cop a note as if like some anonymous tipster's letting him know that he's got like some deal going on with his neighbor, which leads to the neighbor thinking the cops are some sort of peeping toms and actually opening fire on them.
Yeah.
Which is why I said later on in the movie one of the cops is like threatening to, you know, really hurt him. It's because he's the cop that actually got shot.
Yeah.
But And that does actually have some memorable dialogue when you think about it, like that part where the cops are still, they think they don't know they've been found out and they're still watching, and they watch him go and tell the neighbor the story, but they can't hear what he's saying. So they're just like, oh yeah, you can tell that these two have like something worked out. They've got a deal. He's like, look at the gestures they're making. And so and it's kind of funny watching that, because knowing that they're completely wrong and they're actually being set up and they don't know it. And they think they're so clever. They're just like, oh, we're cops and we know we know how these things go down. And they're just like, yeah, these two are definitely more than friends here. They got like a business relationship. When really he's just talking to the guy for the first time, feeding him a bullshit story, so he'll react in a certain way.
He just threw like a piece of yarn across so it was attached to both houses.
Yeah, so they think it's a line that the drugs would be passed over.
That's hilarious.
In case of a police raid and stuff. Yeah, and it's a good thing too, because like I said, it fits in when I was describing him as sort of like a lovable rake or rogue or whatever like that, like that that he would do that sort of thing. He's got the cops on him and he decides like he doesn't have to do this. It's just something that occurs to him that he thinks, would be kind of funny. And it's like, oh, we'll teach those cops a lesson, so it's just it's another good glimpse, not just into his character, but sort of the life they're living, where it's almost become a game between him and the cops. Like, again, they know each other. It's first name basis. It's like, they're going to try to catch me. I'm going to try to make sure they don't catch me. And then, sometimes I'll taunt them about it. Sometimes they will catch me and put me in jail, but no big deal. That kind of thing. And it's sort of a cycle thing too. And that's why I guess it was sort of important that towards the end, he has that scene where Gentry comes and talks to him and says, for once, I'm not here to hassle you. I'm here to give you a heads up on this and stuff. And it's sort of closing the book on that relationship that, Gentry's hoping he won't have to see him anymore. Mm-hmm. And that he can become, for better or for lack of a better term, a good citizen. You don't know if you could ever really buy that about the Bob character, but they definitely give you the idea he's trying. Just the very end, so he gets shot, not fatally, and he's in the
we don't know. I mean, I guess you can assume not fatally.
It doesn't seem fatally because there's not like a bunch of people around him. Like, they kind of just leave him alone. Yeah. Which suggests to me that he must be stable. But when he's talking to Gentry that last time, and Gentry wants to know who shot him, what he says is, first he says the TV babies, which is a reference to, and the hat. Yeah. So the hat, he still feels haunted by that damn hat on the bed. That even now that he's out of that, like, he's still under the bad luck spell or whatever. And the TV babies thing was, I guess that's how he also sees Dave. He's only 26, but he's already talking about sort of the younger generation. Mm-hmm. And at the time he's talking about Nadine, but I guess this time you could apply Dave to it too. And he's talking about like and he says like the TV babies, and I guess what he means is like younger people that like think life should just be like TV, or think life is like what they see on TV and stuff mm-hmm. like that. And he knows better. So those are the two things he says. He tells Gentry, the TV babies and the hat. And Gentry thinks like the hat is some sort of like street name. Right. Like, who is the hat?
Well, I love how it shows his notepad and he just writes down hat.
Hat, yeah.
That cracked me up.
Good luck with that lead. So, yeah. And it's good, too, that that isn't followed up on later, because I'm sure later when he's more lucid, they could go to the hospital, and I suppose he could tell them that David shot him. Although, again, he seems like the type of character that doesn't even carry that kind of grudge. He'd be just like, oh, well, David shot me, but that's over now. Whereas I would be like, yes, it was David. Go get him. Get that little prick, I feel like I'd be a lot more vindictive about it. But then again, it's left to our imagination, perhaps later when he's...
I think it's just, Dave is really jealous of Bob, I think.
Oh, yeah. And
one of the things, jealous and just, generally annoyed by him, by his, success and, ability to do what he does.
Yeah, and Bob, like, I'm not saying that Dave deserves any respect, and Bob doesn't really give him any,
Yeah.
And because their only other interaction between that was when he's, like, trying to shake down some kid who I guess owes him money for some drugs he sold him. And Bob walks by and then decides to intervene. And like he physically intimidates him, which makes him feel pretty small, I'm sure. So I guess that's maybe why he doesn't believe him or still feels the need to shoot him, because that's what it is. Like, they ask where the drugs are. The drugs are gone. And whether he believes him or not, he knows, even if he thinks that Bob is lying, he thinks, okay, he's not going to tell me where the drugs are. And then he's just like talking to his accomplice, and he's like, yeah, we should shoot him. You know, not for any real reason, but just because like he's always probably, you know, like you said, harbored a lot of resentment towards Bob. So here's sort of a chance to get even. And also, I guess, because like it took him about they come in with masks, and it took Bob about 5 seconds to go, Dave, is that you? Like, so he's just like, shit, and takes the mask off. So fix that too. But yeah, as to what you said about, I guess it's possible that that you could think, oh, maybe he's going to die from this, but I don't think so. And it just sort of shows like the way his life has changed in a way, in that he still doesn't really have any clear plans, because like the last line of dialogue he says is something about them taking him to the hospital and stuff, and he just says something like, I hope they can keep me alive. Like so basically what you get out of is he's thinking, you know, he doesn't know what the future's going to bring, but he wants to live.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and maybe that was the big epiphany. Maybe it was as simple as that. He sees Nadine die. He's thinking, you know, I could die. I could die from this. Maybe I want to live. Maybe it's something that simple.
Yeah. Well, sounds good.
Yeah.
So
let us know your thoughts on this film.
Exactly. Yeah, post down below if you guys have any recommendations, or, you know, post the way you feel about this film, or post, you know, a film you'd like us to talk about on here. We'd love to hear from you.
Or any other sort of drug films or something that maybe reminds you of this one, something like that. But sure. Yeah, that was Drugstore Cowboy.
Cool.
Gus Van Sant, 1989.
Well, we'll see you next time, guys. Thanks for watching.
All right, see you guys later. Peace.